So, hi everyone, my name is Danning. I'm a data scientist at ZeroX, and we're a DEX aggregator platform where basically we handle like users' intent to trade across DEX and access the AM liquidity, which is where MEV happens across the DEX or MEV order flow. And that's why this is like very interesting, topic for us. And this presentation is more of like an open research in collaboration with Flashbots, and a lot of data are coming from Flashbots and also EigenPhi. So shout out to them. And so for my agenda today, I want to share more like about, first of all, what's a MEV sharing workflow look like? Let me check the chat. Okay. How does the workflow look like, and what are the rows there, and what are the values there that we try to identify first of all? And then is like, how is the MEV revenue split across each row today? And we will review some numbers that can potentially have an overlap with what Ellen shared earlier. So I'll go quick there. And then next is that looking at this funnel of this revenue split, where can we potentially quantify and extract the user share back potentially? And we will share two approaches here today. One is by looking at the searcher's onchain profits. The other one is by looking at the validator's bid surplus, or sorry, this is actually a typo, builder's bid surplus. So this is a, like a diagram of common workflow of OFA today that we learned about. So basically, we have this user have an intent behind a dApp or a wallet, or you can say also RPC provider can be also the entry point. And then they want to make a trade that's accessing AMM liquidity. And then there potentially will be this OFA or like a MEV share service, potentially. We can call it matchmaker or solver or resolver. And then they will send to a pool of searchers, and the searchers will try to bid for this transaction to basically send a bundle with bids. And so to win this transaction. And if there is no searcher respond with this transaction, potentially this service will just fall back to the mempool, so to make sure the execution quality. And then once the MEV share service figure out which is the highest bundle, which is the highest bid for this transaction, from one of the searchers, they will send bundles towards block builders. And then there is this normal flow of block builders bidding for a block towards the validators through MEV boost. So there's a bunch of like variables or like numbers we need to identify first. So first of all, there is this, now we're talking about how much potentially revenue for user can be from this whole MEV flow. And potentially in the future, we will see probably MEV share service as a middle layer will take potentially a fee as a batcher revenue. And then we will see revenue from searchers that kept to themselves. And for this part, potentially we can see some of them that's on-chain, but a lot of them can be potentially unknown or off-chain, like, for example, like across centralized exchange and DEX. And then next is like how much revenue builders will keep. And then we will see relay, but most of them, basically as of today, there's no revenue for them. And then there will be the revenue for validators. So to summarize this whole thing into like one table, we have this like table here basically to summarize all the rows, and it's sort of like comparison of like how it was in the past, and then right now with MEV Boost as present, and potentially in the future with MEV Boost and also OFA sharing design in the future. There you see like more and more people are taking this piece of cake, and we will see how we can potentially split further. And this is on top is a simplified workflow that's from the order flow auction article from Frontier Research. So one thing very clear here is that basically searcher now is segmented or separated from directly accessing wallet or builders, but through the order flow auction. So to look at the numbers or basically trying to quantify the scale or total values, we want to look at this funnel chart here that I'm trying to propose for framing all these things. So first of all, what's the total MEV here? Potentially there is an unknown part that's off-chain we won't see ever. That's kept to searchers, and then the visible parts on-chain potentially we can see is what we'll call it like on-chain profits from the revenue for searchers. And then after that, the next step in the funnel is how much they given out to builder and validators all together. We will basically have that data from MEV Boost proposer, payouts, rewards data. And then the next is after the builder layer, there's another layer of bidding markets, which is bidding for block. The previous one was for bidding for bundle. And the next is, so we don't know for sure how much builders want to keep or given out, But as of today, it seems like most of the builders will be competing to give most of the rewards to validators, and potentially there could be a extra amount that's outside of this whole MEV value that can be coming from builder as subsidy. So this is a funnel of how this value actually is split step by step or extracted step by step. So let's look at how big are these bars are today. So quick revisit on some numbers that Elaine mentioned earlier, and this is also a call out to her slides here, which is basically emphasizing again that we will not have a way to pretty much know how much is happening on centralized exchange or DEX. What we can see is how much on DEX and across DEX platforms. And centralized to centralized exchange is also another sort of MEV, but this is outside of the scope of our discussion today because we're talking about how much we can potentially give back for DEX users. And the centralized to centralized exchange MEV isn't involved with any intent from the DEX users. So yeah, next data is coming from EigenPhi, and this is a pretty nice breakdown of different type of MEV. We can see that like on this scale, we can see roughly like around daily of 50K to 100K of MEV on-chain profits that can be attributed to the searcher's addresses. And apparently, this is definitely will be under-indexed compared to what's really happening in the reality, because based on all the heuristics, it can only index, for example, like atomic. So there can be a lot more to be indexed. But next is like, so we want to look at how is the split across builder and validator, and it could be pretty tricky because of different type of behavior patterns of builders. So I think a normal flow as how we are looking at on the data of the builder's behavior is that a lot of time searchers will put the Coinbase transfer, which is basically a payout of the MEV address to builders, and then builder as the person who is basically the fee recipient on the block is like basically the fee recipient of the gas fees. And then basically builders can potentially collect all of them, but then decide how much of them out of all the total they want to transfer to validators. So we will see a transfer usually at the end of the block, which is the payouts builder goes to validators. So with this approach, we can potentially index, but there are some sort of like different, I would say, behaviors from some of the builders. For example, we could see some zero profit builders, like they just don't take anything. And usually, sometimes searchers can also skip builders. They just put the validator's fiat recipient directly in the transfer in the bundle. And builder will also sometimes just put the fee recipient of the block as the validator's address. So in this case, builder is not even shown in those block production, but actually they were actually handling the block. There could be also builders that's actually subsidizing. For example, they can just give the gas fee, set it to a proposer's fee recipient address, and even an extra transfer at the end of the block. So yeah. And so I was gonna say basically it's pretty tricky to split the the split between builder and validators. So we will basically just look at them together as a whole and look at the scale. So this is like just like generally when we talk about like a daily total of how much proposer revenue look like, it seems like there was some interesting difference compared to end of last year, which is the first 3 months of MEV Boost alive. And then also the first 3 months of this year, the daily was around 600K, and now it jumps to like 1 million per day. And then I did some cross-check with the data on MEV Boost. It seems like they also have this same scale shown. And then so using another piece of data from MEV Inspect, where we can clearly see how much is the transfer out is versus how much they keep. It's also interesting to see like this clear timestamp cutoff where like in the last 3 months of last year, the split was more of like 70% to the searcher and 30% to the proposers as a whole. And then starting from beginning of this year, it totally changed to another, like basically shifted towards much less for searchers, but much more for builder and proposer together. So these are some basic numbers that we know as of today. Next question is like, okay, now as all the application teams and wallets who have the direct access of users' order flow, thinking about entering and potentially take more autonomy on users' order flow, where and how much, like where can we even extract users' kickback, and how much would that be? So thinking around these questions, I think there's a few things to point out that can be potentially the data that's also accessible that for us to be able to quantify. Looking at this flow again, one thing we can know is that like when the order flow auction take the order information from the application team or the users, they will be able to also know maybe how much the user already request or they want to be shared back. So user can potentially share a request of how much they want to be shared back and deliver that information to the bidders or basically searchers here. And so to see how, this whole thing play out. With one thing they can account is basically if they are able to see all the on-chain profits from the searchers, then they can potentially even say, hey, I'm an exclusive order flow. So like it's only, plus value for you. So can I just get like 99% back? It's possible. So we're estimating more like an upper bound here. And then the next place where we can see actually some sort of number that we know for sure that can be potentially enforced is at the block bidding market, which is when the block builders are bidding across competition to get validators get their blocks. MEV Boost actually have this open data set from the relay that they know what's the submission of all the block builders look like. And one thing we can know is that like, basically the first bidder and the second highest bidder, the difference we can call it potentially as like a bidding surplus, where if we subtract that part, the top bidder is still the highest value validator can access, and they will still accept the block. And so that's a potential, value that we can basically cut and give back to users. So to fit the ideas into this funnel chart, we can basically see like one thing is OFA infra can potentially allow user to request some share that's visible on chain when they are giving out the order flow information. The other is like MEV share infra. Oh, sorry, that's actually MEV Boost infra can basically cut and return a surplus of the highest bid that's above the second highest. So now we have this two approach to potentially quantify how much MEV reshare can come back for user. First thing, let's look at this searcher on-chain profits data. It doesn't really matter the scale here because, as we said, it can potentially be under-indexed as well. But when we look at the margin on all these, arbitrage profits out of the total trading volume, we actually are able to quantify, like say, how profitable per MEV attacked transaction or MEV victim transaction can be, or basically how much MEV can be extracted on a margin like bips base per transaction. And we can see actually like it's interesting to see arbitrage in general is can be potentially more higher margin than sandwiching, and but on like a median stats. But then when we're looking at like the higher bound of 95 percentile and 99 percentile, there seems to be coming into the same trend. And these numbers can be like huge variance for for example, like the median looks like around it's 3 bips, and 95 percentile is around a few hundred bips, and then 99 percentile, which is basically the upper bound or like the max number, is around like 1,000-ish. And then if we look at the breakdown of the margin distribution, we actually could see like at least clearly half of the trades that were attacked by basically MEV bots can potentially produce 0 to 5, which is like we know the median is 3, and so in fall into this bucket, it's around like 5 bips at most. And so Tina asked us to put some number here, so I'm just putting some bold numbers here. If we think about concretely, say now the wallets are actually entering the game, and based on their base volume per month, if we look at this like two biggest players, for example, if you have like around 200 million volume per month, user can potentially expect a total of like say 100K based on the 5 bips point data set. And potentially maybe 2 million as like a really huge like upper bound kind of estimate using the 100 bips that we saw on the 95 percentile. And if your platform has like a 1.2 billion volume per month, then the number can go up to like 600K on a 5 bips estimate and 12 million on 100 bips per bold estimate. So, but caveat here is that this is like a totally an upper bound because it's not all the base trading volume will be MEV extractable because like say it's like super small trade of like $2 and I don't think that can really produce like even 5 bips of MEV value. So yeah, this is an upper bound. The second approach we want to check is basically the block bidding surplus. And on the right side, this diagram shows like what that means. Basically, on each slot or like per block, all the builders they have like the latest bid, and we will check like what's the highest bid per across the builders and what's the second highest bid builder. And then the difference between them, as we described earlier, is considered as like a bidding surplus. Basically, if you extract any percentage out from the highest bid, it will still be the highest bid, and validators had no other choice but to accept it as it's still providing the highest value for them. So this is the methodology. We will check the freshest bid from each builder, and then take the highest 2 bids and take the the difference, and that's like a estimation of the surplus for users kickback. And then caveats is that it's definitely a lower bound. For example, we could say like, why not just take a higher percentage of all the payouts of for the proposer? And second of all is like, it's probably a very practical and enforceable portion that can be implemented through MEV Boost. So yeah, trying to look at like how much is that BIP surplus look like. So I've encountered some limitation on working on this data set because it's too big. So I have to actually take only every time a slice of data of like a day. But then like I checked across time frame, and they seem to give like a pretty consistent number here. So averagely, actually, we can see like per block, the reshare estimate, which is basically the surplus amount between the first and second bid, is around 0.003 ETH, which is $5 as the price of today. And the median can vary, vary around like $1-ish. And then if we look at like 1,000 blocks, it will be around 2 ETH. And then if we just do some paper math, it will be like 25K per day. It seems like not that, exciting, but it's like a lower bound estimate. Another way to look at this is basically, okay, what's the percentage of this surplus outside of the, the total amount of the highest bid, which gives the answer around like a 3%-ish or like a 2% to 5% range, seems like out of the total bidding amount. So yeah, it seems like they're giving us a sort of like a pretty consistent result. So what does that mean here? So if you want to put some concrete number here, if we look at like a DEX trading volume total flow and say just quantifying by the percentage of the DEX market share you are, say if we look at the total bid surplus per month, basically across all the blocks in that month, the total will total up to like 750K. And if you own 5% of the DEX market share, you will get like 37.5K. And if you own like 50%, it will be having like 375K. Again, it's a lower bound. It's the enforceable part that's coming from the block bidding layer. So putting them all together as a full picture is this is what I'm like thinking in my head or to share here. When we look at that MEV revenue split chart again, we saw that shifting of the 30% for proposer to 70% of today. And if we just put that 5% of surplus bidding as a per bid part, we kind of like can split it then further into the numbers that we can quantify here. You would see that the bidding surplus as a lower bound estimate for daily will be 25K, and then monthly will be like 750K. And if we really, and then on the builder proposal revenue part, I put like a red X% question. So that is like the part that we don't know how much we can request, but potentially you can put a number there. But then the search or on-chain profits part is like, through the OFA design, we know that users can already specify how much percent they want to give it back. So that's like a green X% mark there I put. If we total them all together as the on-chain visible MEV revenue, you can see a daily of 1.4 million as a upper bound, and then a monthly total of 42 million as an upper bound. Nice number. And then another thing to point out is definitely the iceberg part that's below the water, or basically off-chain. We will never know how much that will be. I think there are some simulation potential sort of, service that can potentially run across a centralized exchange versus DEX. And so to tell you potentially how much that is. But I don't think that data is like going to be very widely accessible in near term. So I put a question mark there. And one thing to keep in mind is that like potentially with this OFA design coming up, this iceberg percentage versus the one that's above the water can be changing as well, like shifting up and down. So yeah, that's a full picture of the numbers that I've studied on this topic. And last notes is thanks to EigenPhi's data, Flashbot's data, and Tina, Elaine, Sarah, Xingyuan, and Robert and Tom for the help. This meme here, I just want to show that, like, I think from the user's perspective, like, this is our MEV. We want to get a percentage back potentially because we are the value originator. Thank you.